Hey friends, I wanted to take a moment to tell you about my new book, Negotiation Made Simple. For the past 20 years, I have helped business people put together important deals, lawyers settle big lawsuits, small business owners grow their business by getting the most value for their product possible. And through this, I've learned a process on how to use negotiation to deliver outstanding deals. This particular book is those 20 years and everything I've learned about negotiation that's packaged in a very practical guide for solving problems, building relationships, and delivering the next deal. I hope you will jump in, buy this book, read this book, put it to work, and in doing so, you will be equipped to get better negotiation outcomes and to get what you want, not only in business, but in life as well. Go purchase Negotiation Made Simple wherever you buy books and use 2024 as an opportunity to take your next step in your negotiation success. Welcome to Negotiation Made Simple, where we help you master the art of negotiation and win the next deal. I'm your host, John Lowry. Today, we are going to jump into another topic around neuroscience. And this is another part of these kind of series of episodes that I'm doing every now and then on neuroscience. I am fascinated by the application of neuroscience to negotiation, and I think it will be one of the most transformative things going forward in terms of helping people become master negotiators. The other being AI, which we'll talk about more as well. But today I want to talk about association bias. It's a short-circuited process in how our brain makes decisions. And we can use it in a positive way, but it can also be very dangerous. And so this episode, I will walk you through how it is that association bias came to be. How is it that we can use it in a positive way? And then how association bias becomes the essence of stereotyping that can be very dangerous if we don't manage it well. So let's jump into our conversation today about association bias and the impact that it has on the negotiation process. Hey everyone, are you interested in any free negotiation advice from me? I would love to help you with your deal or your challenge. We've made it super simple. Here's all you have to do. Wherever you download your podcast, there will be a link. Click on that link that says, ask a question to John, and I will get those questions every single week. If you ask me to, I am happy to respond directly, or if it's just a generic question, I will address it on the podcast so that everyone else can benefit from the answer. We've tried to make it super easy, and so I encourage you to reach out and to let me become your coach in getting you to that deal or getting you through that difficult situation. This is great fun for me, and I hope can be really helpful to you. If you're in business or you're in leadership or you're running organizations, working with people, you want to be aware of these dynamics that are going on that are part of being human, are things that are just realities, things that we can't necessarily control. These are different things that happen at a subconscious level. And they're things that we've got to understand so that we know how these things are used as it relates to us and our decision-making. But then going further, I also want you to be thinking about how you can use these things to influence the decision-making of others. And so today, we are going to spend the entire episode thinking about association, and more particular, association bias. Now, before I get into that, let me back up for just a second. We'll do a little review from last week, and I think it will set the stage for why this association bias is so important to consider. So association bias is a form of short thinking. And if you will recall, as we think about short thinking, this is the process that many people use to make decisions. And the reason that people use this process is because it's easy. It's one of the ways that our brain short circuits the decision-making process. And that's something that the brain has to do because of the amount and the volume of decisions that it has to make and the volume of inputs that it has to process on a daily basis. And so some say that we have to make like 35,000 decisions a day, and that there are even countless more inputs that our mind processes every day. And so for our mind to keep up with just the stimulants that exist out there in the world, our mind has had to learn how to short circuit the decision-making process. And in doing so, we develop habits, and we develop ways in which our mind short circuits and makes decisions for us. Now, it's really important to know this when we're negotiating, because negotiation is about decision-making. And as we think about influencing others' decision-making, it's really good to know how those decisions get made. And so this fast type of thinking, these are decisions that are made effortlessly. So for example, as we think about the power of fast thinking, just fill in the blank here. Bread and, you probably thought of butter, or you probably thought of water, but your mind went to something easily and instantaneously when I just started the phrase bread and you were able to very easily fill in the blank. If you have someone that's truly bilingual, they speak multiple languages, this is how their mind is able to jump back and forth between languages. This is part of the fast thinking that you see reflected in their ability to speak different languages. There's a lot too to where if you just have someone look at a piece of art, that art will stimulate a response. And so there's been a lot of studies done about this to where if you show someone a pastoral scene, something in nature, that pastoral scene will have a calming or soothing or happy effect on the person. But if you show someone a picture of a city that is bustling with people, then there you will stimulate reactions of busyness and energy and chaos, and you will stimulate very different responses. This is a result of fast thinking. And so with that as the backdrop, I want to talk about a particular type of fast thinking that I think is really, really important. And that is this idea of association bias. The idea of association bias is that there will be one word that when your mind hears it or processes it, it will then bring to mind another word or idea. And so your brain, as soon as it gets that stimulus, it will immediately go to something else. And that's the moment that we want to think about, how is it that we can trigger someone's brain to go to something that we want them to go to? Okay, so as consumers and in the world of marketing, we see this all the time. And I want to share with you a couple of different examples about how companies are trying to position themselves using association bias. And quite literally, with no exaggeration, there are companies that have made billions upon billions of dollars because of their use of association bias. Okay, so let me just give you a couple from the past few days. So I was in an airport yesterday. I'm walking by a Johnston and Murphy store that is in an airport. And there is a sign in the store that says, "Not your father's clothes." Now I want you to think about that for just a second. Like, what is Johnston and Murphy fighting? They're fighting the association, right? that Johnston & Murphy is my father's clothing brand. And if you don't want to be stylistically, in terms of your clothes and your look, if you don't want to be exactly like your father, who probably comes from a different generation and dresses differently, then immediately your association bias would say, don't buy Johnston & Murphy clothes. And so they recognize that. They know that. They're savvy and smart enough and understand that to attract the younger generation of buyers, they have to get over that association bias that exists about this being the father's clothes. And so they take it head on and they put their really modern styles, very contemporary look right out there. And then they wrap that up by speaking directly to your mind, trying to disassociate their clothes with people's fathers. And so here you see, just walking through the airport, you've got association bias that is at play. All right, let's go to another clothing company while we're on it. And this is one that has made billions on association. It's one I love to talk about, and it's the company Nike. All right, Nike started back in the late 70s, kind of early 80s, and Nike was working really hard to try to compete and to try to differentiate itself. It was fighting with Adidas. It was fighting with Tiger, which was, I think, kind of the precursor to ASICS in terms of the running space. And so you had Nike that was competing, that was trying to figure out how is it going to differentiate itself. And so Nike started moving into other sports other than just running. And one of the sports that back in the early 80s, Nike was really excited to get into was basketball. They thought there was a great future in basketball because of the number of people, especially here in the United States, that played basketball recreationally. And Nike saw that as a tremendous market that they wanted to go after. And so what Nike did was, not being in that market before, being a new player, having to take on Converse and Adidas and some of the powerhouses in the basketball world, Nike went out on a ledge, took a huge gamble. And if you watch the movie Air, it will, in 2 hours, kind of lay out this whole process in terms of putting a deal together with a young superstar out of the University of North Carolina, Michael Jordan. And so Nike signs Michael Jordan, to the surprise of the basketball community, over Adidas, over Converse, over the other players. Here you have this superstar that signs with Nike. And Nike begins to build not only a new basketball line, but they begin to build the brand of the entire company off of this one superstar, Michael Jordan. And so if you think about some of the ads played right into this, right? So for example, you'll remember Be Like Mike. And if you'll remember, they did whole campaigns, whole commercials, whole songs about being like Mike. Now, that whole idea of being like Mike, what is it? It's association bias. And what Nike is trying to say to us as consumers is, if you wear these shoes, if you put on these Air Jordans, then maybe, just maybe, there's a chance that you will play basketball like Michael Jordan. Now, as we look back on that 30 years or so, what do we now know? Well, the reality is there's probably only a handful of people that could truly make the claim that they play basketball like Michael Jordan. For most of the rest of us, we got snookered in by association bias. We spent $150 on a pair of new Air Jordans with the hope that we could play basketball like Michael Jordan, and it didn't happen, but it doesn't matter. Because what did happen is we put those new Air Jordans on, we felt better about ourselves. We felt better about our games. And even though very logically and rationally, we could come to the conclusion that we probably aren't going to turn into Michael Jordan. We did it anyway because it made us feel better about ourselves, and we wanted to be associated with Michael Jordan, and Nike gave us a vehicle for doing that through the Air Jordan shoe. Now, this plays out in business all over the place. I remember one time I was talking to a company about coming and doing a bunch of leadership development work for them. And we were talking about doing some work with their executive leaders. Now, this is a Fortune, probably 200 company. It is an absolutely huge company. If I said the name of it, you would know the brand immediately. And as I'm talking to their vice president of learning and development, who's charged with putting this program together, I'll never forget when she looked at me and said, "John, I'm really impressed with your stuff." But she said, "Here's the problem." And I said, "What's that?" And she says, "It doesn't have Harvard's name on it." And I said, "Well, yeah, of course it doesn't, because I'm not affiliated with Harvard." And she goes, "I know. And that's the problem, is even though I kind of like your stuff better, the reality is we're going to go with Harvard. And we're going with Harvard because my executives, they want to be associated with Harvard. And for me, if I go with Harvard, I don't have any risk because Harvard is seen as the best in the business. If I go with you, I've got a lot of risk. And so, unfortunately, your stuff was fantastic, but I need to go with Harvard." Now, why did I lose that deal? Why didn't I win that business? She conceded that I had the better solution, that I had the better product. But at the end of the day, what was more significant than that to her was the association that existed with Harvard and its reputation and its brand in the executive learning space. So even though I was better, according to her, I still lost because this association bias thing is very, very real. And we've got to know how to manage it well. In many of my negotiations, as you all know, I negotiate with lawyers a lot. And many times as we're trying to negotiate a settlement to the case, the reality is that association bias plays in. And the association that the plaintiff's lawyers are looking for is they want to be associated with the big settlement. They want to be associated with this big moment here because what they're trying to do is they're trying to elevate themselves. And so they want to have a big 8-figure settlement that'll help elevate them. They want to be associated with that, or they want to bring home that verdict and be associated with that verdict, because this will help them in terms of marketing to other clients. It will help them in terms of their reputation amongst other attorneys. And so they're looking for that association. And at times that becomes a driver in the negotiation, is the fact that they're trying to achieve this negotiation through the process. And so it's something that on the other side of that, I've got to understand and I've got to learn how to manage. And so what I want to think about with you today is a process for how it is that we embrace this idea of association and how it is that we use it really effectively. Now, before I do that, I also want to be very real, and I want us to understand that this idea of association bias, it is not always positive. It can be used negatively as well, and we have to be careful of it, especially as negotiators. And so if you think about stereotyping and you think about stereotypes, this is another form of association bias. And yet this is a form that can be very unfair. This is a form that can be very presumptive. And as a result of that, people can be mistakenly associated with other people or other ideas or other perceptions that frankly just isn't fair, because it's the result of a stereotype where an association has been placed over a population of people, even though there are certain people within that population that don't fit that stereotype at all. And as a result of that, a lot of negative things can occur as a result of association bias as well. And so I want to make sure to acknowledge that and to make people aware of that we're using this all the time. Sometimes we use it very positively. Sometimes we can use it in a way that isn't as fair or isn't as responsible, and therefore it can put people in bad situations and put people in situations to where they find themselves associated with things that just aren't reality. And so we've got to be careful about this whole idea of stereotyping and understand, though, that it is really powerful, which is why people do it. Okay? So how do we deal with association bias in the context of negotiation? All right, first thing is this. As we think about the process, we need to think about what people are going to associate with the process. Okay, really, really important here. And this can happen on a positive or it can happen on a negative. So when I was leading a development team for a major university, I had one of my development officers tell me a story one time that almost made me puke. I just couldn't believe that the lack of judgment in this particular colleague. And so this particular colleague is going on a development call. He flies down to Florida and he's going to see a donor to ask for a 7-figure gift for our university. And when he came back from the trip, he was really excited and he was bragging about the fact that when he got to the rental car place, the rental car company didn't have his class of car. And so what they decided to do was they decided to upgrade him. And so he got upgraded into a Mercedes-Benz. And so he rents the Mercedes-Benz and he goes and he drives to the donor's house. Here he represents a nonprofit higher education institution that is asking this donor for money. And here he goes driving into the driveway in a brand new Mercedes-Benz that he's just rented. Now, I want you to think for just a second, just pause with me and think about all of the association bias that happens in this moment. When the donor meets him at the door and they're sitting in the donor's driveway, is this guy's Mercedes-Benz. Now, what's the immediate association if you're driving around in a Mercedes-Benz? Mercedes has worked really hard to create this association as a luxury car brand. And part of that is this idea of status and this idea of sending a signal to the world that you have means, that you are able to afford, and you've reached a place in life where you can drive a Mercedes-Benz. But when you're a development officer asking for money, you don't want to send the signal that you have the kind of money to where your people can be renting Mercedes-Benz. And you also don't want to send a signal that that's how you steward money by sending your people out and having them rent Mercedes-Benz. And so here, my dear colleague just completely didn't understand association bias. And he didn't understand the perceptions that would be created by that. And he made a really bad decision that day to rent a Mercedes-Benz. He should have taken the car class below, not the car class above. And he should have showed up in a Toyota Corolla instead of a Mercedes-Benz as he was going to see that donor. And so there, we can make mistakes around association bias very, very quickly as we're negotiating if we are not careful. And so it's important that we pay attention to perception management and we look around and say, okay, what will people associate with what we're wearing, with what we're driving, with where we're staying, with the office building that we have the meeting in, all of those different things. What is it that people are going to associate with that experience or those messages or signals that we send them? The next thing that I want you to think about is how to use association as a benefit. And so how is it that we can create associations that the other side will value, that they will want? And how is it that we can work that into the deal in order to make that happen? So, for example, I'm working right now in terms of doing a little bit of consulting with an organization that is trying to elevate the level of its board members and trying to create a different experience for its board members. And so one of the things that we've talked about doing is creating a circle that would be able to bring very high profile, influential business leaders, government leaders, community leaders to come have private conversations with this circle and to attract a higher quality person to this circle to be able to advance the organization. And so as a result of that, notice here, we are completely just leaning into association bias. We're trying to find more senior leaders to join this organization. We're trying to find people with influence to join this organization. And the way and our strategy for how we do it is to try to put them in conversation and community with people that they see as having already aspired to where they're aspiring to go. And then right in the middle of that, we want to put this organization as the vehicle for them to get there. And we think that if we're able to do that successfully, then some of those very significant leaders who have said no previously might be interested and say, yeah, I want to be associated with this group of people that you're bringing in to have these conversations. And as a result of that, I'm ready to join the circle. And so how is it that we can use association bias as a benefit, and a benefit that taps into the needs and the interests of others? The other way that we can use it is we can also create a fear of disassociation. And so when people become a part of something, that creates a moment to where they do not want to be left out. And so as a result of that, it's very influential in terms of saying, okay, in order to do this, here's what I need you to do. And if you don't do it, here's what's going to happen. And if that is a disassociation that people don't want to have happen, then here's the moment of influence. And so I get this a lot. Again, it's a negotiation around raising money to where I'll get an email that says, we are really honored that you have chosen for the past 7 years to be a part of the such and such circle of this organization. And we look forward to this upcoming year, but we want you to understand that your dues are due by such and such a date. And if they are not paid by such and such a date, then you will no longer receive the benefits or be included as a member of the circle. Now, that little thread, it almost seems like it's just administrative, but it's not. That little moment right there is a really important association bias technique to where they're saying you don't want to be disassociated. And so as a result, we need you to pay your dues by such and such a date. And then the last thing I'll say in terms of how to use this in negotiation, and you'll have to think about your context and how to use it and how to creatively bring this into play. But going back to kind of the warning I gave earlier, I think it's also very important not to stereotype. I've made this mistake to my detriment more times than I care to admit, to where almost at a subconscious level, I stereotyped somebody that I was going to have a negotiation with. Because of where they were from, because of the type of work that they did, because of their age, because of a lot of different things, I associated that with a certain type of negotiation behavior, and I was completely wrong. And so it's really, really important that as negotiators, we don't make assumptions and we don't do too much stereotyping, because if we do, we can find ourselves making decisions that can be very perilous if we think the other side is going to do this in response to this, and we find out that we're wrong, we can leave ourselves in a really bad place. And so, yes, I want you to be anticipating, but I don't want it to go so far to where we are now, because of stereotypes and because of association bias, we're putting things on other people that we haven't verified. Things like how they're going to behave, things like how they're going to pursue the deal, things like the moves that they're going to make or how aggressive or non-aggressive they're going to be. All those things, we've got to be careful not to allow stereotypes to drive what we think and what our assumptions is about the process. Okay, so those 4 things right there, if you put those to work, I think this creates a model to where you can use association bias in a way that works for you, and you also can be aware of and be careful not to fall into the traps that association bias creates for us. And so, as we think about neuroscience, while oftentimes it's not called that, it plays out through this theory or it plays out through this idea or this bias. The reality is this is happening every single day in the business world because this is how people operate. This is how people think. This is how people make decisions. And if you can become a master of that, if you understand it better than your competition, if you understand it better than other people that are trying to win the same business that you are, you will find yourself substantially ahead in terms of solving the problem or winning the deal because you know the triggers, you know how to use them to your benefit, and you know how to stay out of the pit of despair when you screw this up. So it's really fun to go deep with you all. I love thinking about the mind and the brain and things like decision making, to where now we're taking negotiation into levels that not many people will go. And that if you're committed to listening to this podcast, to reading the Negotiation Made Simple book, what I want to give you is the science behind the suggestions and the advice. And there really is some interesting science that is coming out that really helps us understand the human brain and how the human brain makes decisions. And today, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation about association bias and how impactful it can be on us as negotiators as we're trying to solve problems and we're trying to put deals together. So here is your assignment. What I want you to do is you leave from this podcast and you go back to work or you get back to family life, all the things that you do. I want you to begin looking for association bias around you. It's not going to be very hard to find it. I will give you a big hint. Just watch the presidential election. Watch any of the news, any of the pundits, and you will see association bias at work. But I also want you to see it in your own world as a consumer, as a business person, as an organizational leader, as a manager. I want you to begin to look for this because if you have the eyes to see it, then you will develop a way in which you can put it to work to your advantage, and you'll also be aware of the moments where it can be a potential distraction for you, or it can suck you into something that you don't want to get sucked into. And so if we develop the eyes to see this around us, I think we're going to be in a better position to manage it more effectively. Thanks for listening to Negotiation Made Simple, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.